Good evening and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns Hour here on YouTube and DLive. My name is Tom Luongo. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, and tonight I want to talk about Game of Thrones. We're not going to do our normal geopolitical thing tonight. I've got a lot of stuff to say about Game of Thrones. A lot of it is culturally relevant. It's not just I'm going to sit here and complain about how badly they screwed up the ending, which they did. I'm going to talk about why they screwed it up and why it's important and why screwing up a story with this much cultural resonance and this much cultural significance is actually really terrible. And I'm going to go into some stuff about the mechanics of writing and the mechanics of storytelling tonight because, well, this is what's on my mind and this is where I want to go. So it's not for you tonight. You want to go in a different direction, take Monday night off, have a nice night. But you might learn something if you stick around. All right, so as always, you can follow me over at tomluongo.me. You can give a like and subscribe down below if you like what you hear tonight. Please do. I do live streams every Monday night at 8 p.m. and every Friday night at 8:30, as well as ad hoc during the week. A couple of 2-3 other times during the week as time permits. So, and you can sign up for the my Patreon over Patreon/GoldGoatsAndGuns. All right, so let's get right to the subject at hand. The subject at hand tonight is Game of Thrones. Now, I have a long history with this story, much longer than many of you. I walk in very serious geek circles, and one day in 1996, a friend, my good dear friend Larry, came into my home and said, "Guys, I really want you to read this." Now, at the time, we were spending a lot of time. Our off time, we would just spend, chatting about various books and movies and things that we love, and it's what we do in geek circles. We talk about these things, and stories are important to us, and the obsession for us for years leading up to this was Roger Zelazny's classic Chronicles of Amber, which is a great story and a game and a role-playing game that we spent a lot of time with. But he came in and he said, "I really want you guys to read this. I think it's got the potential for us to spend and get deep into it like we have with Amber for so many years." And I said, "Okay, Martin. Okay, George R.R. Martin. He's a hack. But maybe he's risen above it. We'll see." Okay, Camille read it. She said it was good. Read the first book, said it was good. I read the first book and actually enjoyed it because, well, it was mostly story and a lot less of Martin's normally turgid prose, which I absolutely can't stand, and came to hate very quickly. But I didn't get much past the first book, and I didn't get past the first book for a reason. And that is, it became very obvious to me very quickly that he lost the thread of the story, and I just didn't find it all that compelling after, the first book was well plotted and well written, and it's actually not very long, and then everything just balloons and all of a sudden, I'm staring at thousands of pages of this going, this is not what I signed up for, and I don't believe that more pages equals more meat, and that more detail and more world building builds better story. All right, especially in novels. And some people have a higher tolerance for this than I do. I don't have a very high tolerance for it when I'm reading a novel. I generally want my world building to be as minimalist as possible. Get me to the story, get me through it, and use brevity and use concise, tight language to tell me the story. That's what I prefer. My favorite writers are all this way. These guys like Philip K. Dick and Zelazny and Kafka and others who I just absolutely adore for their economy of language. Now, I'm not a man of economic language, but when I write fiction, which is rare, and I don't publish any of it, it's all very terse and all very almost third-person descriptive. And I give very few writers a lot of slack when it comes to that amount of time. And there are only a couple of them where I'm willing to go with in terms of effectively flowery language. One is Stephen R. Donaldson, who deserved that time, and the other is Neil Stephenson. And but beyond that, so Game of Thrones for me, but never got away from my house because Camille really liked the books, and Larry, of course, obviously loved them, and everybody else in my circles had read them, and so they were always in the conversation somewhere. Now remember, this is 1996 when my original print, which I finally gave away, of Game of Thrones, the paperback, I mean, raised letter print on the thing, first printing, Song of Ice and Fire trilogy on the inside, inside page 1. I mean, I don't have it anymore, but I had all 3 books. Camille read them all. I got about 150 pages into the second book, Clash of Kings, and this stopped. And this sat next to my bed for years. Picked those books up. I had I remember I used a small receipt from, I don't know, like Burrito Brothers or something in downtown Gainesville as my bookmark, and it stayed there for years from where I stopped reading it. Always intending maybe one day I'll come back and pick it up, but I'm like, I don't know, there's just something about this story that's like not grabbing me. So eventually wound up back on my bookshelf, and it got moved in storage for years. We build a house. We're in the house. Camille, the 4th book comes out after we build the house. Camille reads it and gets angry because Martin went off into La La Land. But regardless of that, for years, Game of Thrones has been a dominant thing or sub-dominant thing in my life for 25 years. And Martin has never finished them. Now, fast forward to 8, 9 years ago, I see a notice that, Sean Bean's going to star as Ned Stark, and they're going to make HBO's going to make a series. I'm like, okay, it may not suck. At least the first book's good. We'll see if they've got it. And then after that, if they can condense 1,000 pages into 10 hours worth of television, I'm there. Because God forbid I'm going to slog through 1,000 pages of this guy's prose, because that's not going to do it. Just not going to do it. Series comes out. We watched the first series, probably somewhere into the second series. I'm like, this is really good. I mean, objectively, the storytelling is excellent. The cast is great. All that, the early seasons of Game of Thrones. And now I'm a guy who's been on record for 15 years going, I fucking hate this story. I don't understand why people like it so goddamn much. Yada yada yada. And I'm having to eat a little crow. All right, fair enough. They did a nice job with the television show, and it still hadn't really gotten insanely popular yet. So I went back and tried reading the books again, and I got through the end of the first book. And in my mind's eye now, I was telling Camille this earlier, my mind's eye now, when I got to the point at the end of the first book where Joffrey orders Ned to be killed and Ned dies, Ned Stark gets his head chopped off. In my mind's eye now, it's like the light of God shone down on the page and said, oh, you, the writer, you understand. He just made his classic mistake. He fucked up right here and there. He should have never done this. And I actually made it all the way through Clash of Kings. I got 100 pages into Storm of Swords, threw it across the room, gave it the James Joyce treatment, threw it across the room, never touched it again. I'm like, I'm not reading another word of this man's prose. Like, he still hasn't finished book 4 yet out of 9. I don't know whatever the hell he's on. I'm like, fuck him. I'm never reading another word of this. But I realized what happened. And I said it then. I said it 7, 8 years ago. And we talked about this on streams in the past. Talked about this in other circles in the past. I said, when Martin made that decision, he lost the thread of his story. I don't know if you guys have ever read any Neil Stevenson, but there's the Baroque cycle. I always think of this. The Baroque cycle has a great character named Jack Shafto, and Jack Shafto is completely fucking crazy. And in his mind, and in the way he always describes it, the imp of the perverse sits on his shoulder and whispers in his ear, and that's what makes him do the crazy shit that he does throughout the story, which is a fantastic story. By the way, the Baroque cycle is fantastic and well worth the 3,000 plus pages that it takes to finish, as opposed to Game of Thrones, 3,000 pages into it, and they hadn't even gotten started yet. He's 6,000 pages in, and he still hasn't even come close to finishing it. So. And I think that the imp of the perverse stood on Martin's shoulder and told him, kill Ned Stark. Kill Ned Stark. Kill Ned Stark. Kill Ned Stark. And he did. And I went, that was a mistake. Because at that point, the story ballooned out of his control, and he had no control over it since then. And Martin is a guy who writes characters. He doesn't write plots. He had a very kind of standard plot in his mind, and then all of a sudden, he was going to subvert all of Tolkien's high fantasy tropes. That was his goal. He was going to try and do this, and he lost his story. And he lost it bad. A guy like Martin is a pro. I've got a blog post, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I haven't finished yet, but One of the things that's the truth, and I don't begrudge George R.R. Martin cashing in on Game of Thrones. He slogged in near anonymity for a long time, probably living a very modest middle-class lifestyle as a second-rate, and at best, up until Game of Thrones, his life was going to be, a second-tier guest at a third-rate con in Tampa, Florida. I get it, man. You write something that does that, it blows up for you. Go for it. Cash in all you want. I don't begrudge him $1, a moment of that. What I begrudge him is not being a pro and finishing a story. One of the things about Game of Thrones that excited everybody was that, well, anybody could die at any time, and all of these things, and that there was this sense of fragility to all of the characters, and because of that, it kept people's interest, and it was so steeped in all the classic tropes of high fantasy, but was also subverting them because the world had sunk into complete and utter chaos. And it never, ever recovered. Now, like I said, Martin has gone on record as saying he wanted to subvert all of the tropes of high fantasy, and in many ways, the tropes of heroic storytelling. And that's a problem. And this is a fundamental problem. And I was right. While watching the finale of Game of Thrones on Sunday, I had already realized this ages ago, but finally it dawned on everybody that Martin never had a clue as to how to end the story. He told Benioff and Weiss, the two showrunners, what the plan was, or what he had written, and then what his version of the story was going to be. They went off and wrote their own version of it, and they didn't have a plan. Because holding to this idea that they would write this kind of postmodernist version of Tolkien doesn't work. It doesn't work. Mythopoetic storytelling, archetypal storytelling, is important. Stories of this magnitude and of this cultural resonance, when you set up all of the archetypes, when you set up all of the tropes, and then you ask us to go on a journey into literal hell, you pay that off with some version. And there are plenty of endings to Game of Thrones, potential endings, that would end with all of those conventions, archetypes, and tropes paying off and still not being predictable. It's User 13, it's not that nihilism just isn't that interesting. It's that nihilism isn't storytelling with a capital S. Postmodernism, which assumes that the world is absurd. I've read Italo Calvino, I've read Sartre, I've read all those guys. And you know what? Part of me, when I was younger, when I was an adolescent, thought they were kind of cool. I mean, like, if on Winter's Night of Traveler is a fun intellectual exercise. It's not a good story, but it's a fun intellectual exercise. Okay? I mean, I've got literary bona fides here. I'm not like fucking around here. Okay? I mean, this is important. Okay? I'll read postmodernist stuff that's cool and edgy like that, but if it doesn't pay off with a human lesson, it's not worth reading. There's an infinite gulf between Woody Allen's God, a play, and Grant Morrison's Animal Man. I mean, this is the kind of shit these are the kinds of conversations that happen in my house. Okay? Because Woody Allen's God, a play, which is in Without Feathers, his book Without Feathers, is cute and it's funny and it's hysterical and it's ultimately pointless. And it tells you that from the moment the play starts. Okay? It's a complete send-up of Greek tragedies in a completely postmodernist way. And Grant Morrison's Animal Man is a complete refutation of the way in which comic book stories are told. And yet at the end, even God is moved by his creation and grants him a boon. Okay? I consider issue 5, The Coyote Gospel, one of the great short stories of American literature. Right? Even though it was written by a Scotsman, but it was published by an American. So I'll call it American literature. Let's just call it English speaking literature, English language literature. It's an amazing story. It's one that every time I read it, I cry my eyes out. Okay? Every time. Game of Thrones had that opportunity. You cannot ask people to go on a literal journey through hell and not give them some form of ending that's relatively cathartic. I remember seeing Clint Eastwood's Mystic River with my wife one night, and this is a very dark movie, one in which the bad guys get away with everything, and it's an ending that's very cold. And it's Dennis Lehane, so I'm not surprised. And Camille completely rejected it. Completely rejected it. And I don't blame her. I think back on it now. It is. But it's a 2-hour movie. I can live with that. Game of Thrones is 100 hours of television. You have to pay off Jon Snow. You have to pay off 7 years of of teaching Daenerys Targaryen how to become a ruler. You don't just have her have a pit of feek. She's got a fit of peak. She's not. I can't even blame it on her period because she's fucking barren, for Christ's sake. None of it makes any damn sense. And then she just tortures an entire town and commits freaking genocide. And while Jon stands by like a literal eunuch and goes, "My queen." I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean, I'm sorry, but I haven't hit every writer's workshop that's ever happened in this life, but even I know you don't emasculate your main hero unless that's your point. Unless your point is that this is a postmodernist text. Unless you make the point here that it is all just freaking absurd and it doesn't matter. And that because what is the archetypal story? The archetypal story is one in which the old institutional order has collapsed. Or is in the process of collapsing. It's right there in front of us. It's no longer the institutional order that exists. The stories that have sustained us, the institutions that have sustained society are no longer adequate to the job of keeping people, of acting as a brake, a curb on people's worst impulses. Right? That's the basic setup for all archetypal stories. That's what they're about. It's what the Bible's about. It's what Star Wars is about. It's what Harry Potter's about. It's what the Hunger Games is about. It doesn't matter what it is. The institutional order has become tyrannical. The leadership has become blind, either willfully or otherwise. And it's going to collapse. Now, this is Game of Thrones. This is the setup. The Stark children were fated from the beginning. They get their hound, they get their wolves, they get all the signs are there, and the Stark children are supposed to be the ones to bring about a new institutional order. Okay. Maybe Ned shouldn't have. I just don't think Ned should have died at the end of the first book. He should have died much later if he was going to fill the story in the way he did. If he was going to tell the story the way it was originally intended to be, it was like book 1 happens. 5 years later, book 2 and book 3 happens. Well, that's a different story. He decided to fill in everything else and he was fucked. But once you accept that premise, and that is the premise, you have to pay that off. And now you're going to build heroes. You're going to build characters and build heroes that are going to journey into the underworld, bring back knowledge. They're going to do all the things they have to do. This is a time-tested, and this shit's in our DNA. The people who are howling and screaming today about how badly they fucked up Game of Thrones are angry today because a story of archetypal power that has meant something to them has been betrayed. at a fundamental level. It would be like Return of the Jedi. As bad as Game of Thrones season 8 has been, it would be the equivalent of after 3 years after Luke, I am your father, we get into Return of the Jedi, and we get two acts worth of we get the same first 2 acts that we have now, padding, and then we get to the confrontation between the Emperor, Vader, and Luke, and they all turn out to be fucking trannies and, live happily ever after. I mean, you don't stick a landing. You all you have to do is stick the fucking landing. You don't have to stick a good landing if you set everything else up properly. If you just stick a conventional landing, your audience will be happy. The lesson will be, you can still tell whatever lesson you want. You can still tell the lesson that the world is, no matter how much we try to make the world a better place, it's not going to be. You can tell that story. You can tell the story that power corrupts and all this other thing. But at the end of the day, it has to be your hero, in this case, Jon Snow, who is the agent of that change. And they did not get that at all. So it's insane that Benioff and Weiss couldn't take the threads of Martin's story, prune off all the crap, which in many ways they did. They killed a bunch of characters off. They wiped out major houses. They did everything they needed to do to prune the narrative down to 10 or 12 characters in Winterfell against the army of the dead. And guess what? Not goddamn one of them does anything worth a shit. Except Deus Ex Arya. So, which was dumb. Like, and they apparently they knew for 2 seasons that Arya was going to kill the Night King. I'm like, that's Jon Snow's job, you fucking morons. It's Jon Snow's job to kill the Night King. Maybe Arya could be there to help him, whatever, fine. Stage it however you want, but at the end of the day, it's Jon's job. Because then Jon has to go down to King's Landing and figure out a solution to the problem. My wife this afternoon came upstairs while I was working. She's just like laid out an alternate ending to Game of Thrones, which would have worked brilliantly and beautifully and elegantly, and said all the same things that Benioff and Weiss were actually trying to say, which is that the man who doesn't want the power is the one who should have the power, or the one who's incapable of wielding power is the one that should have the power of the throne, yada, 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 all this stuff. But instead, what you get in the end is this muddle of characters making bad choices, acting out of character, running around acting and doing nothing for hours of television. And when you betray character arcs like that so badly, when you mishandle your main character arcs that badly, and I'm not just talking about Dany and Jon here. I'm talking about Varys. I'm talking about Tyrion. I'm talking about Arya. Jaime Lannister should not have. I mean, come on. I mean, any way imaginable. If anybody said, well, you'll never figure out how Game of Thrones ends, says, yeah, because we had to come up with an ending so fucking unutterably stupid that no one would predict it. Like, no, give us the predictable ending, you fucking twats. It's what we wanted. And here I am sitting here vindicated, going, it was always going to end badly because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And now even I feel like a fucking jackass for getting even partially invested in it. But I feel really bad for the people who are immensely invested. And now they have to sit there like Star Wars fans like myself had to sit there and apologize for the fucking prequel films for years until we finally got enough distance on to go, oh wow, Attack of the Clones is really fucking bad. Okay. So, Bot, My wife figured out that Jon Snow was Lyanna Stark's son, bastard son of Ned Stark, of Lyanna Stark's son, and half Targaryen. And she was like, yep, it's going to be Dany and Jon are the two dragon riders, and most likely Tyrion is the third one, because, oh, by the way, the show just dispensed with the fact that we don't actually know Tyrion's parentage, oh, by the way. And that they were going to be the ones to ride the dragons to defeat the White Walkers, yada, yada, yada. That was, I mean, she figured that shit out back in 1996. She read the first book and she said, this is how it's going to end. This is how good my wife is, okay? I'm not kidding here. Like, we've been having this discussion for 25 years. Okay, when you guys complain, when people complain about The Last Jedi not doing, not paying proper homage to the story that has come before, we've been sitting here geeking out for years going, the Jedi fucked up in the prequels. They made, I mean, everything that comes out of Luke's mouth in the Last Jedi came out of our mouths in like 1999, like 20 minutes after we got finished watching The Phantom Menace. Okay, that's how clued into the shit we are. That's how good we are at like story and fiction and structure and all of this stuff. Yeah, AF Rules, you actually don't watch it because the first 4 seasons are so good, you're going to think, oh my God, how could they not end this well? I mean, it's just freaking outstanding. It's all character driven, it's intrigue, and it's backstabbing. Who's this? And at the end of the day, when you strip all that away, it's actually a very simple story. That the people involved in it are so fucking cynical that they didn't want to do that. Now, there I disagree with you, Stoyanovich, that the prequels are masterpieces compared to 7 and 8. I disagree. I think they're all excellent silent films. I think Lucas's films are all excellent silent films. I'm going to like move off of Game of Thrones, but you understand now what my problem here is. You cannot betray archetypal films, archetypal filmmakings, and storytelling like they have, unless it is a political agenda. I'm going to like move on to why Game of Thrones is actually far worse than anything that's happened in Star Wars episodes 7 and 8 a little while on, because this is a rant that I've been wanting to have for a while now. But the title of this talk is why this is a warning of where we're headed. I want you to understand something. Most of the people in Hollywood do not know how to write an actual fucking story. Okay? They don't teach Bob McKee's story anymore. They don't even teach Sid fucking Field anymore in screenwriting classes. Okay? They don't teach Vogler's the writer's journey. They don't teach any of that stuff anymore. Okay, I've read all these books. They're all really good. I absolutely recommend everybody reads Robert McKee's story. You should also read Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey, which is kind of lays out the guts and bare bones of the heroic cycle, right? You need to know this stuff. You don't necessarily need to read John W. Campbell or any of the other stuff, but there's like some of this stuff you should just read. It's not that tough. They're easy reads. Story is amazing. It's a little dated. It was written back in, I think, 1999, so it doesn't go up anything past like The Big Lebowski or even 95. When was it 95? Like, no, I think it's 95 because he actually references Barton Fink as opposed to The Big Lebowski as a non-plot kind of story. Bot says, yeah, Bran is evil, changed my mind. I watched the Ben Shapiro thing about Bran being an evil genius. So, I mean, so what's the point, right? So think about it this way. The old institutional order is inadequate to the task to put the brake on people's worst excesses, right? So who do they put in fucking charge? Who do they put in charge as king? Tyrion, the smartest guy in the room, puts the living embodiment of the old institutional order in charge. Bran is a man without a future and without a present. The whole point of the next king is he's supposed to be the new institutional order for the new generation that are going to come after this. They don't have that. What we have is, well, no, nothing's going to change. People are just people, and it's all just absurd and pointless. That's what they did. I mean, literally, Bran is a manipulation of the old gods who manipulated everybody into doing all this shit in the freaking first place. They are the ones who created the White Walkers and created the dragons and created all this crap in the first place. The whole mythology of Westeros is just on a big freaking It's just a big wheel. And it's not even an interesting wheel because the wheel's not going anywhere. It's just stuck in place. It's not like the wheel turns and we're into the next generation and then the next generation and then the next generation, right? And the story evolves over time as conditions in the world change. No, we're going to wind up in the same place 30 years ago. It's important to understand here that it's not just that it's dumbed down garbage, Dragon M. You're missing a subtler point I'm making here. These people have not been taught the basics of storytelling. They don't even believe in the basics of storytelling. They don't believe in stories and the power of story and the power of myth. And even worse than that, they even put in Tyrion's mouth. They put these words in Tyrion's mouth. They say, people don't follow kings. They don't follow armies. They don't follow this. They don't follow that. They follow stories. And stories are the things that sustain us from generation to next. I think he literally says this. So as a way for the writers to apologize for the crap that they're spewing at us. So who's got a better story, as Ben Shapiro said, who's got a better story than Bran the Broken? And Ben Shapiro's like, well, everybody. Sansa does. Jon does. Fucking Grey Worm has a better story than Bran at this point. And it proves that these guys don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. They didn't even understand the power of their own story to then they could tell a cynical story, but you still have to tell it within the archetypes and within the tropes. You can't set up the person like Jon to be the hero and then have Jon stand around like a ballish eunuch. There's no generation coming. Bran can't father children. Sansa needs to get the money. I mean, at the end of the day, the Starks are going to rule all of Westeros in 30 years once Bran is done. Once Bran dies of fucking ass rot sitting in a chair. For 20 years, right after he dies of ass rot sitting in a fucking chair. And Sansa pumps out a couple of kids and boom. It's, the Starks rule everything. Which they should anyway. They're the only people with any freaking sense in the entire thing. Hollywood's become Janine Garofalo, telling jokes with no punchlines. Not all of them. And so this is the difference, right? This is what Marvel's going to do. Marvel's already there. They've decided. I mean, I already figured this out with Marvel ages ago that they were going to go to this. They were going to go to this place where they were going to, at the end of the cycle, going to tear down all of the straight white males, Captain America, Iron Man, all of it. They were going to tear all that stuff down. They were going to hand it all off to Brie Larson. And once I saw them cast Captain Marvel, I knew exactly where that shit was going. So. And yeah, they could have even had. I mean, look. At the end of the day, I'll tell you what should have happened. This is what Camille came up with this afternoon. I'm going to give you my ending, the alternate ending for Game of Thrones, and then we'll go from there. Dany doesn't go crazy and torch the city. Okay, or Cersei refuses to surrender, and Dany, in order to kill Cersei, she destroys the Red Keep, and in the process of killing Cersei, has to kill a few civilians, and it's terrible, and no one's happy with her for doing so. But Dany, over the course of the season, comes to realize, starting at the beginning of season 8, that Westeros will never accept her as queen, and it's not her fucking home anyway, and she should just go home. And why the hell does Dany want Westeros anyway? It's cold and it's a shithole, and it should be ruled over by people who are native to it. Jon doesn't want the throne, but he's the rightful heir. So after Dany secures the victory, she decides she doesn't want the throne of Westeros. This is your feminist argument. This is actually a feminist conceit here. She takes her dragons, which are her children, because she's barren. Remember, Dany's barren. She can't have kids. That's why the dragons are her kids. So she fucks off back to Meereen and all the lands that she liberated and rules over them. While she then secures the throne for her house, redeems her house, and redeems the Mad King, but like Moses, can't rule there. So she leaves. No, they set Jon up to be the fucking Moses character. Well, he's created paradise, but he can't live in it, right? This is standard Moses story. I liked it done better in War of the Planet of the Apes, by the way. So And Jon sits on the throne unwillingly and gets to having babies. Because the Starks and Targaryens are the ones who should rule. They're the ones with the claim. And let's end this thing and move on. And they fill in the details from there. But the basic framework for that would work beautifully. And you tell the Greyjoys to go shut up and go sit on the Iron Isles and don't come out because you people are fucking crazy. God, though, they were the worst plot device of all time. Hey, when chaos is needed, let's just bring in the Greyjoys. Fuck off. All right. Yeah, don't even get me started about the Unsullied. They needed to be wiped out as well. And the whole process of that would have left her with, some amount of, and all they had to do was to go down the King's Landing with 2 or 3 dragons. I mean, think of it this way. They didn't want to deal with Tyrion's, they didn't want to deal with who was the 3rd dragon rider, so they just killed the 3rd dragon off and then turned it into Undead Dragon, which was fucking stupid. Then they throw away another one of Dany's dragons in order to try and get her to feel, in order to get her to go crazy, which is insane. Just bad writing, especially since you can't ambush a dragon at sea. Okay, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And that way, Jon, the man who doesn't want to be king, presides over the country for a few years until one of his sons can be passed off to Sansa as a regent, and they go on. And Westeros is still shit. But it's different. The Baratheons are gone. The Lannisters are destroyed. The Freys are gone. All the really bad ones are gone. And the only decent fucking Greyjoy is actually sitting on the, is sitting on the Iron Islands. And that's fine. They never explained what happened with the Dothraki. I got news for you. The Dothraki would have never accepted what happened. They followed Dany. They didn't follow Grey Worm. The fuck is wrong with these people? I go on and on and on. I don't want to. So I'd actually rather go one step further. So let's take a look at what we're dealing with in Star Wars. So I know you guys I know a lot of you don't like the new Star Wars films, but I'm going to bring you down. I'm going to bring you up to speed on what's going on the differences here. I just watched The Last Jedi the other night for, I don't know, the 12th or 13th time. I love that movie. I think it's fantastic. And I know I'm in a distinct minority on this, and I don't care because I think it's a great movie. And I think it's a great movie for a number of reasons. You may not like the story that Rian Johnson told in The Last Jedi. But the story he told competently. He didn't just tell it competently. He told it superlatively. And from an archetypical perspective, and from a mythopoetic perspective, and the hero's journey perspective, everybody is exactly where they need to be going forward. Especially if you understand that Snoke was never supposed to be the big bad guy, because then it would have been predictable and terribly boring. But if you look at what they've done, right, from an institutional perspective, from a big picture perspective, they have not strayed one whit from the path. Star Wars is still telling that big story and telling it well, even if you don't like some of the details. As far as I'm concerned, Star Wars is such a fucking weird story. I consider creation myth anymore, and creation myths are by definition weird, and in many ways, what's the word I'm looking for? Inconsistent, because that's what creation myths are. The weirder they are, the more they stick in your brain. The crazier the trappings, the more you remember them. What does everybody remember? What do I remember about Jordan Peterson's talk about the Egyptian mythology? Isis picking up the fragment of Osiris, which happens to be his penis, and impregnating herself with it in order to create her son, right? Who's the one who winds up That's what I remember. Why? Because it's fucking weird that this fragment, that would do. The penis still works. How does that work? It's a fucking story. It's not meant to be taken literally, and a lot of Star Wars is not meant to be taken literally. Because if you take it literally, it's fucking stupid. It's dumb. It's crazy. It's insane. It's moronic. We are space wizards in a kids movie, right? So, but nothing he did in the story breaks the big story. Okay? The Force still operates at its primal level, and in this case, it's everything still works. And I don't want to go, because it's going to take me an hour to like set all of that shit up. And actually, I've got other stuff written about this that I haven't published yet. But Johnson didn't do anything to break anything. He just ended this version of the Jedi Order because that version of the Jedi Order was incapable of protecting against the chaos. It allowed for Luke to rise and be a hero in his part of the story. And now what's left of that, what's left over from that story, all the leftover bits, Leia, Luke, Ben Solo, have to be dealt with. And apparently, some part of Palpatine is still out there. Which I actually am kind of interested in. I never expected them to do that, to be honest with you. But it actually makes a kind of sense. Because episode 1 started with the creation of Anakin as an antipode. The Force created Anakin to blunt the rise of Palpatine. Palpatine himself is a virgin from the Force, from the dark side. So it only makes sense that this whole saga, set 1 through 9, has to begin and end with dealing with Palpatine. From that perspective, it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't... If they pull it off, I can go with it. But nothing about... And that's okay. And look, Stoyanovich is complaining to me about they have to delve into Clone Wars and Rebels to understand everything. You do, a little bit. And that's fine. And I don't have a problem with that. In many ways, the only way Revenge of the Sith as a text makes any sense is if you watch all of the Clone Wars. Because Anakin and Padme's relationship in Revenge of the Sith makes no goddamn sense otherwise. Even though, and the actors have no chemistry, the blocking is bad, all of it's bad. It's just not good. So, go back and watch episodes 1 through 3 again, with a weather eye towards the density of storytelling, and you'll realize that Lucas is telling like 45 minutes worth of story in 2 hours and 15 minutes, whereas in both The Last Jedi and Force Awakens, they're telling more than the screen time's amount of story in both of those movies, because the arcs of all the characters are so much better drawn. Poe Finn is still a kid. He eventually winds up graduating to Finn is now finally, something close to a young man, because Finn is still a boy when we meet him. He's a boy throughout all of Force Awakens, and he doesn't even become a man until the end of The Last Jedi. Poe finally gets an arc. But what's happening with Kylo Ren, these arcs are really well defined, and they're really well done. And Rey is no more a Mary Sue than Luke is. So, like it or not, she got her lightsaber taken away from him, the same way that Luke got his lightsaber taken away from him at the end of Empire Strikes Back. Yes, Horus. Thank you. Juan Isaac, I love all of the characters in The Last Jedi. I even came to appreciate Holdo on the second viewing. When I didn't really like the movie the first time I watched it. It was but I don't trust my first instincts on Star Wars movies, because I know that I just know that I have too much invested in them. So when I went back to watch it the second time, and I watched Holdo very carefully, and watched the interaction between her and Poe very carefully, I absolutely adored it. And I still do. I think it holds up well. I think it could have been done slightly differently. And Kelly Marie Tran is great. Rose is a good character. She's a very positive influence on Finn. Finn is a boy who needs to have his fucking shit handed to him. You don't leave You don't, in a time of chaos, in a time of crisis, you don't get to go off in a blaze of glory and leave the women and children behind to be unprotected. That ain't your fucking job, dude. You stay and you do what you need to do. And Jon Snow did that for 7 seasons in Game of Thrones and then fucked off at the end. Are you kidding me? It wasn't an SJW fest. It wasn't a Marxist fest. It was exactly the opposite of that. It felt that way on the surface if you weren't willing to do the hard work to go through the story. As a matter of fact, what Rian Johnson does in The Last Jedi is to give Luke an arc that is nearly as powerful as the one he got in the first 3 movies. He had to take him from a very dark place and bring him to his conclusion. And I think that Luke's arc is incredibly well done. And we not only get that, but we get failure. We get all the themes about failure and nonviolence and forgiveness, which is a hard thing to do, to know when to forgive yourself and to forgive other people around you. It's really a very, very well designed story from the ground up. Yes, can you complain about certain aspects of use of time? I have a real problem with use of time in The Last Jedi, to be honest with you. Other people don't. And there's things that you could, complain about. But from a thematic perspective, from an archetype perspective, every character hits their mark perfectly. Rian Johnson isn't subverting the archetypes. He may have subverted your expectations of the direction that each of those archetypes would, and those arcs would flow, but he didn't subvert the actual arcs themselves. Rey still has to fail to become the next hero. She's wearing gray throughout the entire second and third acts of the movie, for Christ's sake. She's still conflicted. You have Poe, who has to learn how to become a leader. You have Finn, who has to learn how to grow up. You've got Ben Solo, who has to grow beyond his master and embrace his evil. And you have to have Luke come in out of the cold and confront his worst failure. I think it's a beautiful story. I like Rogue One too. Stoyanovich, don't misunderstand. I like Rogue One as well. I don't know that Rogue One's archetypes, I don't know that they quite work. I can see a lot of where Tony Gilroy had to cut and paste together a good movie out of the one that Gareth Edwards originally shot. Was they originally shot a very cynical, non-heroic Star Wars movie. And Kathleen Kennedy took one look at that draft and went at the first cut and went, this won't do. And fired Gareth Edwards and brought in Tony Gilroy and rewrote the whole thing and then literally reshot 2/3 of the freaking movie. And they did that in the last 6 months. Rogue One was practically delivered to the theaters wet in old movie parlance, where the prints were literally drying in the cans, for Christ's sake. So, I love Rogue One. I like Solo. I think Solo is a really solid movie. And it's not earth-shattering or anything, but it's a good, solid adventure film. I love it. Hey, did I watch Star Wars Episode 4 in 1977? No, I didn't see it until 1978, actually. Dragon Ross. It didn't come close enough to my home to see it until July 10th, 1978 is when I finally saw Star Wars. I'll never forget it. I stood in line with my parents for 45 minutes. We went to the Squire Theater in Newburgh, New York. But it had played in the drive-thru in Poughkeepsie for over a year. It played down in northern New Jersey, and we were in what was called a tertiary market back then. Films weren't distributed to all places at all times. In 1977, it went to the primary markets first: New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, and then the secondary markets, and then the tertiary markets, like where I was in upstate New York. So, but I did see it in the theaters then. I saw it a couple of times in the theaters that year, and then I saw it every time it was re-released. I saw it another couple of times in the theaters, and it was life-changing. I was 10 years old. It was life-changing. And Why are they ruining great franchises? Well, I got Anthony Macros asks on YouTube, and it's a good question. They didn't intend to ruin Game of Thrones. They just never had a franchise that they knew how to shepherd in the first place, for all the reasons that I laid out earlier in the stream. They're not ruining Star Wars. They're just moving it in different directions. Look, Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian looks fucking fantastic. I don't know if you guys saw the stuff relative to that. I just think that you're going to see Star Wars. They're going to take chances in all of the quote unquote saga films. They're not going to play them. They're not going to play them safe. Okay. But at the same time, they also want to give the traditional fans, the same thing. And I think that the traditional fans want too much all at once. And I think that I think a lot of what's the angst around Star Wars, and in particular, I think is a reflection of our own angst about the angst we feel in our culture breaking down, and the aggressiveness with which the power structure and the decaying and dying institutional order that we're living in is exerting on us to keep us from being able to express ourselves well. We're worried that the Mouse House is trying to destroy that. And it's a valid fear, guys. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely get why people are worried that Disney's fucking Star Wars over. I just don't see it. I don't agree with it. I think it's a conclusion in search of data, as opposed to being willing to be generous. People are not, and I don't think that they're willing to be generous at a time like this. You got to remember now, the Marvel films don't take chances. They don't take any chances, and now they're going full on SJWPC, and it's going to be crazy. Fear is the mind killer. I'm looking forward to Denis Villeneuve doing Dune. Okay, talk about a story that's all about the existing institutional order is not capable of curbing humanity's worst impulses. Dune is like right up there. Now, yeah, the writers of Game of Thrones are supposed to be working on a start. They've got a contract to work on a Star Wars trilogy. They're talking about the rumors are the Old Republic. If I were Kathleen Kennedy, after watching last night's episode of Game of Thrones, I would tear up their contract. I would give, and all the development money I'm giving to them, I would give that to Rian Johnson. I don't have any doubt that Rian Johnson is going to deliver. He's still working on his films as well, and those are probably the ones that are going to be farther along in production than anything that Benioff and Weiss could possibly be working on at this point. And I have no doubt that Rian Johnson will deliver superlative filmmaking. He has always done so since his first independent movie he made called Brick. I've been watching this guy work since he started, and everything I've seen of his work is absolutely, in my mind, stellar. And that he went from making little independent movies and a small low budget or mid budget science fiction movie, Looper, which is fantastic, by the way, also fantastic, an unbelievable story, to The Last Jedi, and pulled off The Last Jedi the way he did. Unbelievable. Rian Johnson's trilogy has not been canned, Jonathan. You're wrong. It has not been canned at all. That is and here's something else that I want you to understand. We live in a time where they want our franchises destroyed. Game of Thrones was always a dicey prospect to become a cultural institution, because it was built on a foundation which said it did not want to be a cultural institution. Okay? It was meant to subvert those ideas. If you want my honest opinion, guys, my honest opinion is that a great deal, I think there's a very strong desire on the part of a lot of the people sowing discord and discontent in the society right now want to see Star Wars destroyed. Star Wars is important to two generations of Americans. What better way to enact revenge on the deplorables, Gen X, anybody who thinks that they're going to get out of line, anybody who pokes their head up and they're going to get smacked down again, than to destroy Star Wars in the minds of a great number of its fans. I mean, I understand people were angry with The Last Jedi. I'm not saying that people weren't angry with it, but I think some of this is astroturfing at this point. And I think it's taken on a life of its own in a way that is not real. So, yeah, I have no problem with the way Rian Johnson has defended his work. I think you stand up for it. You don't shy from it. You don't do what Benioff and Weiss have done, which is they turned off their friggin' phones for the last 9 weeks. You're out of your mind. You know, he's defending his work. You want an artist who defends his work. You want an artist that can get in there and defend his work. Period. The fans don't always have the right answer. In the case of Game of Thrones, they do. In the case of The Last Jedi, I think they're dead wrong. And I remember I was there in 1980 when we all sat there after The Empire Strikes Back came out, and everybody was like, what the fuck was that? Nobody in their right, nobody my age was happy with The Empire Strikes Back. Nobody. We didn't love it until we finally got to see it again and again, and finally started to let it percolate. But it unnerved us. The Empire Strikes Back was disturbing. I was in a complete fucking denial until Return of the Jedi came out. I'm like, no goddamn way is he his father, and no goddamn way is she his sister. I'm like, it was no way, no. And I'm still angry about it today. I still think it was a bad decision on Lucas's part to make Leia his sister. I think it was terrible. It was never my favorite when it first came out. Star Wars has always been my favorite. I think Empire is an amazing movie. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a tremendous piece of film. And I love it to death. I love it to pieces. I watched it 150 fucking times. I don't know how many times I watched Empire. It's a brilliant movie. It's structured like Fight Club, for Christ's sake. I mean, think about this for a second. It's structured like Fight Club. There's a through line between Fight Club, even The Sixth Sense, and The Empire Strikes Back. Because when Vader says, "Luke, I am your father," you all have to kind of put on our seatbelts and put our seats back up and stow our trays in the seat back position, right? I mean, think about it for a second. You have to immediately go back and review the whole fucking movie because you thought you were watching an adventure coming of age movie. You thought what you were watching, and no, you weren't. What you were watching the entire time was the Emperor and Darth Vader sucking Luke into this moment to turn him to the dark side. All of a sudden, this movie turned into something completely fucking different. And the bad guys all of a sudden were really freaking bad. Oh, it's the dude, Stoyanovich, I agree with you completely. The Empire Strikes Back, Luke, I am your father. Luke, I am your father. 5 biggest words in movie history. Without a doubt, the greatest singular reversal of all time. That line of dialogue is its own act. I mean, in like movie act structure, it's its own act, for fuck's sake. It's so big. Larry Kasdan and Leigh Brackett wrote the whole fucking thing in 3 weeks. So when people complain, for example, in The Last Jedi about, well, they can't possibly force project and all this bullshit. I've always watched Empire with the idea. My friend Larry, my good and dear friend Larry Oceans, and I would sit there and talk for years about how Vader and the Emperor were manipulating Luke by seeding the Force with images to manipulate him to get him to do what they wanted him to do. That was the whole point of The Empire Strikes Back. It's mirrored in Attack of the Clones. And as Larry said to me as we walked out of Attack of the Clones the first time, and he said, of course Palpatine knew that he could get Anakin to do... actually, we were talking about Empire, and he said, of course he knew he could get Luke to turn, or he could get Luke to turn, because it already worked once with Anakin. Lucas set it up in Attack of the Clones, that's how it was designed. And so they take that in... So Rian Johnson uses that in The Last Jedi to go one step further and have Snoke manipulate both Kylo Ren and Rey into doing his bidding, and then Kylo Ren uses that foreknowledge to turn on fucking Snoke and kill him and rise above his master, because his master made the fatal conceit of thinking that he was still stronger than his apprentice. It's fucking brilliant, guys. It's brilliant storytelling. Absolutely brilliant storytelling. It's a geek like me. I watched The Last Jedi and I'm just like, God damn, Rian Johnson's a bigger Star Wars fan than I am. I mean, I've said this many times. People watch these movies. Well, sorry, people see these movies, but they don't actually watch them. They think they have this version of Star Wars in their head that they think they're watching. But they're just seeing the picture, they're just seeing the thing on the screen, but they're not actually really watching it. I thought it was really good in execution. Watch it again, watch it carefully. It's really good. Adam Driver's really good. Snoke is really good. I think it all works really well. Look, holy shit. Well, I should really get out of here anyway. It's a little, we're doing an hour now, so I'm about done. But there we go. And we should weep for the future as, and oh, by the way, just as an aside, because I've been stuck on the couch on and off for the last couple of days with this weird stomach flu thing or gastrointestinal distress thing that's been going, I've been dealing with for a few days now, since last Wednesday night. I've been rewatching Babylon 5. You want to talk about heroic storytelling of the most epic type? One where all the fucking tropes are like right out in front of you. As opposed to running from Tolkien, they embraced it completely and then burped it out into space. And then dragged it out for 5 years. 120 episodes or whatever. 110 episodes. Babylon 5 is amazing. It still holds up, even if it is a little dated now. But as far as storytelling is concerned, and the structure and the mechanics of it, and the characters and the way they're drawn, and the way, it's immense. It's so good. Oh, Leia Poppins is awesome. I disagree. I don't care about the space chase either. Again, we run with it. But I get it. You could have told the story differently. It's fine. Again, I need the story to, the story works at a thematic level for me. I'll give up all sorts, and the character level, I'll forgive all sorts of stuff. So they could have done, there's many things they could have done differently in The Last Jedi and structured a little differently. I agree, but I'm more than happy with the movie that I got. More than happy. All right, guys, this has been great. It's been fun. I'm going to go watch an episode or two of Babylon 5 before I go to bed. You guys take care. If you liked what you heard today, it's Gold, Goats, and Guns. We don't always do this kind of stuff, but we always do it with this level. Whatever we do here, we always do it with this level of analytical acuity, depth, and for the most part, passion. You guys take care. You have a great night. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.